Hey everybody, it's the Mad Master here. I'm doing another video, and this one has been in the works for quite a long time. I got the thumbnail made probably uh, 2 years ago. So, anyways, this one is about the idea of a multiverse in the Star Wars franchise, and that's something that people really I haven't heard a lot of people talk about, and I think it's probably would be a good move on Disney or whoever will own it in the future. Who knows with all that, their part as far as everything goes. So here's the situation. Defining a multiverse in fiction, it's pretty easy. And let's go through the history. So one of the first not franchises but companies to push the concept was DC Comics in the mid 60s. So what had happened was they had owned all these properties, all these comic book heroes that were in the golden age of comics in the late 30s, early 40s. That kind of died down, and then they had to account for all this time that passed. Like, I don't remember what, I'd have to read about it again, but it's like, basically it was like, well, how is this person 50 years old or 60 years old or whatever, since so much time has passed, 30 years has passed, or not 30 years, but 25 years has passed since the Flash or Superman. How are we going to account for all this time that's passed and all these things that changed in the comic? So they did, a lot of new science fiction stuff has a lot of this concept too, and even physicists and scientists are talking about the idea of a multiverse, which is really fascinating. And even back then there was some speculation about that too, and so the writer of the Flash comic did a comic called, I think it's called The Flash of Two Worlds, where he had this new Flash and this Golden Age Flash meet up. So you have these different timelines, different parallel universes, and all this stuff. And that became such a thing in Marvel Comics that I think it inevitably influenced a lot of other fiction and franchises and so forth. But with all the talk about Star Wars and the whole thing with them maybe rebooting the sequels that came out, which is kind of, in a way, it's kind of messed up, because it's like they put all this money and effort and hype into it, and then now they want to reboot it again, or reboot it, not again, but it was kind of like a reboot in a way, which some of the stuff was recycled. That's why. So it's kind of silly, but I think they can get away with having a multiverse like DC, and even Marvel has that somewhat now. Not as much as DC, but in a lot of different fiction franchises and stuff have the multiverse theory. I mean, it gets a little convoluted in DC Comics because there's like all these worlds. They have all these reboots, and this something happens to influence less. That like Crisis on Infinite Earths in the 80s and all this stuff, and Final Crisis and all this stuff that happens, in DC, where they have these little mini series where these superheroes from this other timeline or parallel dimension or reality or whatever you want to call it, or from this multiple universes, of course, meet up, and they have to fight, and then they sometimes forget what happened, like like in the Flashpoint, and there's a lot of different stuff that happens. It's kind of cool sometimes. It does kind of hokey and convoluted and silly at other times. So that said, in Star Wars, it's never been done. But I think to give fans the best service possible, they should do it, because you have this extended universe, expanded universe, whatever, that's still, it's like, these novels that came out and all this, starting with a role-playing game in the late 80s, there was all this stuff that came out with this expanded universe. So you have a different timeline for where Luke Skywalker and all the rest of the original crew went and what they did with their lives. And now it's just like Legends, Star Wars Legends, and all this stuff. It's like, well, why not just like solidly say that there is a multiverse in the Star Wars universe? It would make things a lot easier. I mean, you can even go back to Splinter and a Mind's Eye and have that as some alternate universe thing, and some people can expand on that. it's not. I mean, there was some stuff with Dark Horse that kind of hinted at that, like the I have a comic somewhere, and it was about the original concepts of Star Wars, and they had Luke Starkiller and all this stuff in it. It was a lot different. It was kind of cool. So I have, they've hinted at it at times, but I think they should do it, and I think that would alleviate a lot of the fan tension and a lot of the contention in general with Star Wars. It's like, well, the whole saga, the whole sequel saga happened in this one universe. They splintered off at some point, and the expanded universe stuff, happened in a different universe, like, with Luke Skywalker getting married to Mara Jade, and, Han Solo and all that stuff. It's just different universes. Come on, let's just do this. I mean, it's about time they had a multiverse in Star Wars. It's just, I mean, it would just make more sense to everybody, I think, to have this. And they don't have to make it as, like, expansive and convoluted as DC Comics has. I mean, DC is just like almost like micromanages the whole thing. That was just like the Sandman universe thing, which is kind of their excuse. Okay, this is what I think would happen with the Sandman universe thing. People were kind of people like me, were kind of decrying DC for kind of getting rid of a lot of this DC Vertigo imprint, and or not decrying, I don't know if that's the right word, just like, criticizing DC and like questioning DC for getting rid of the DC Vertigo, a lot of DC Vertigo universe, the dark universe, so to speak, because they had all these really lame, I wouldn't say really lame, but PG-13 versions of the Vertigo characters and their stories. Like, I'll give you an example. John Constantine became almost like cartoonish, and in the original Hellblazer, which ran for like 30 years, 25 at least. I mean, I think Garth Ennis even said that he kind of took it out of the superhero universe after a certain time frame, or maybe it was Jamie Delano. In a way, it's like in the beginning of Hellblazer, I think they were mentioned, superheroes were mentioned to some extent, or Swamp Thing, of course. But after a while, it was just like Swamp Thing existed, Sandman, John Constantine. Magic was, even Garth Ennis was so real, and even Delano were so realistic about it. See what I like. Okay, I'm just going to go on a little tangent here. I like, I play old school World of Darkness role-playing games, like Mage, The Ascension, Vampire the Masquerade, and Werewolf the Apocalypse. And one of the things, they have this dichotomy between what's real and what's not, and there's always a struggle. So what I like is that, they have all the stuff, the technocracy, this is part of the World of Darkness role-playing thing, it's called the technocracy. Science, rationality, all this stuff is at war with the supernatural elements and stuff, and they try to say, try to make it into fiction, all this magic stuff. So on that note, it seemed like in Hellblazer, some of the writers of Hellblazer over the years were trying to separate it from the DC superhero universe and make it more realistic. So, for example, I think it was John Constantine's niece in one arc, or I don't know if it was her or him. I'm trying to remember. I've read most of the series. It's just been a while since I read the early ones. One of them could see ghosts, but not everybody could see ghosts. So some of these things people can see, in this reality, in Hellblazer, and some people, like some of this really weird supernatural shit, and a lot of people can't. So it kind of makes this dichotomy that I like, just like what I described with the World of Darkness stuff. But anyways, that's on a different tangent. So they took away all that with the newer John Constantine comic series, and it lost its edge. And same with a lot of that stuff. So DC came back. Now they're doing this Sandman universe thing. I think it's kind of the dark universe in what's that, Grant Morrison, I forgot what it's called. He did a kind of a multiverse series for a while that talks about all the multiverses. I'm trying to remember. I bought it. I didn't read it yet. It's a huge graphic novel. But anyways, they lost some of the edge, but you can always, the thing about DC is that you can always excuse it. It's like, well, that's one universe, that's the other universe, this is one universe, this is all these different parallel realities. So if they do that with Star Wars, I think it would be very beneficial to fans and people everywhere, because I think it would just be something that, you know, we can expand upon. So if, you know, if a director wants to direct this movie regarding Star Wars, let's, you know, even like Rian Johnson, you know, God forbid, I know people really hated his take on stuff. If he wants to direct a trilogy, it could take place in a separate universe or a separate reality. It's all part of the weave of the multiverse of Star Wars. That should be the way it is, in my opinion. And I think that's a good direction if they decide to do this, because all this talk about rebooting the sequels and doing all this stuff and just pretending they don't exist. There's these rumors coming out lately, and it's just kind of, I find it kind of unfair in a certain way. It's like kind of commercially motivated. It's like, come on, you know, just own up to your decisions. I mean, it's just like, but at the same time, I think the decisions have been, you know, going south since the mid-90s in some ways. Like, I was going to do a video about this, but I think pretty much after Shadows of the Empire, a lot of the Star Wars product has just been, it's missing something some of the time, missing some of that magic. And like one of the things that bothers me about later Star Wars is not only the midi-chlorians, but just like, that was one thing that Rian Johnson actually said. I'm sorry, I'm rambling again. We've got complaints. Oh, whatever, fuck you. It's fine. I don't care if people think I'm rambling. But Rian Johnson did bring back this concept that anyone could have the Force. Like at the end of the was that The Last Jedi? Yeah, Last Jedi. And that was one thing that I grew up with watching Star Wars. I always thought that was the case. I didn't think there was this genetic lineage or this midi-chlorians and all this crap. So after the mid-90s, after Shadows of the Empire, that's kind of my cutoff point of thinking that Star Wars had something. Even though there was a lot of good stories that came out, like some of the expanded universe stuff, it still is kind of like that cutoff point with Star Wars for me. Like the quality just went down, the commercialism, of course, with the prequels and then all this stuff, it just, you know, kind of went south. But all in all, you know, we can have not an expanded universe, but a multiverse where even the, you know, the most obscure Han Solo novels that contradict, you know, the canon could just have, they take place in an alternate universe. They take place in an alternate universe. Just do that. It's a great idea, long overdue. That's all I got to say.